Blood pooled around the imperial censor's neck as Emperor Hongwu personally supervised the man's slow beheading with a blunt knife. The assembled court officials watched in horror, their faces frozen in desperate smiles, lest their own horror be interpreted as sympathy for the condemned. The dying man's crime, suggesting that the emperor, born Zhu Yuanzhang, had once been a beggar and Buddhist monk before founding the Ming dynasty. Though these facts were undeniable, the emperor himself had acknowledged his humble origins earlier in his reign. The mere reminder now constituted a capital offense. As the man's head finally separated from his body, Hongwu turned to his trembling courtiers and spoke with unnerving calm. "Let this be a lesson. The past is what I declare it to be." It was 1380, and China's most paradoxical emperor, the peasant who became a ruler, the beggar who amassed unprecedented wealth, the revolutionary who became more tyrannical than the dynasty he overthrew, was demonstrating once again why his contemporaries feared him as much as they revered him. No founder of any Chinese dynasty rose from such humble origins to the pinnacle of power, and no emperor exceeded him in suspicion, cruelty, and the shedding of blood, writes historian Timothy Brooke. Yet few matched his intelligence, his administrative genius, or his obsession with freeing China from foreign rule. This contradiction between Hongwu's undeniable achievements and his pathological brutality defines his legacy and the dynasty he created, which would rule China for 276 years. Born in 1328 into crushing poverty in Anhui province during the waning years of the Mongol Yuan dynasty, Zhu Yuanzhang's early life was a catalogue of miseries that would shape his worldview permanently. By age 16, he had watched his entire family die from plague and famine. First his parents and brother, then his sister-in-law, forced to marriage elsewhere when the family couldn't feed her. Historian Frank de Cotter notes that this early trauma left him with a deep-seated insecurity and suspicion that would manifest throughout his later rule in increasingly paranoid persecutions. With no family and no prospects, the teenage Zhu survived the only way possible, first as a wandering beggar, then as a novice at a Buddhist monastery that offered shelter and food in exchange for labor. Even this meager sanctuary proved temporary. When the monastery ran out of resources during the ongoing famine, the monks dispersed, sending Zhu back to the desperate world of rural destitution. For the rest of his life, writes biographer Edward Dreyer, he would be haunted by memories of his early starvation, leading to his obsession with agricultural productivity and grain storage once he attained power. What turned this destitute wanderer into the founding emperor of a dynasty? The catalyst was China's collapse into rebellion against the Mongol Yuan dynasty in the 1350s. As famine, corruption, and natural disasters fueled popular uprisings across China, Zhu joined the Red Turban Rebellion, a millenarian Buddhist sect promising the coming of the Maitreya Buddha and the overthrow of Mongol rule. Starting as a common soldier, Zhu quickly distinguished himself through military talent and political shrewdness. Unlike many rebel leaders who were primarily motivated by religious fervor or personal ambition, Zhu displayed an unusual capacity for organization and governance even during the rebellion. As historian Carney Fisher observes, while other rebel commanders focused solely on military objectives, Zhu established civil administrations in territories under his control, winning popular support by reducing taxes and punishing abuses by his own soldiers. This pragmatic approach to rebellion, focusing on stability and civilian welfare rather than merely military conquest, distinguished him from rivals and gradually expanded his power base. By 1364, Zhu had eliminated or absorbed most rival rebel groups in the Yangtze River Valley. In 1368, his forces captured Beijing, overthrowing the Yuan dynasty and establishing the Ming dynasty with himself as the Hongwu Emperor. What followed was one of history's most remarkable attempts to transform a vast empire through the sheer force of one man's will. The psychological profile of Emperor Hongwu reveals a man shaped by extreme poverty, extreme ambition, extreme suspicion, and extreme determination. Contemporary accounts describe a tall, powerfully built man with a booming voice and commanding presence. More revealing are the descriptions of his temperament, capable of both surprising generosity and shocking cruelty, often within moments of each other. He would weep openly when discussing the suffering of common people, writes historian Ray Huang, then order horrific executions over minor infractions by officials. This emotional volatility reflected Hongwu's fundamentally divided nature. Despite ascending to emperor, he remained psychologically the abused peasant boy, perpetually insecure about his legitimacy and obsessed with the threat of betrayal. As biographer Edward Dreyer notes, having risen from nothing, he lived in constant fear of returning to nothing, seeing conspiracies in every corner of his court. This fear manifested in increasingly brutal purges, culminating in the devastating purges of 1380, when tens of thousands of officials and their families were executed, often on the thinnest pretexts. The Hongwu Emperor's reign was defined by contradictory impulses that made him simultaneously revolutionary and reactionary. His humble origins gave him an unprecedented empathy for peasant suffering, leading to reforms genuinely aimed at improving rural welfare. He reduced tax burdens, rebuilt irrigation systems, distributed land to the landless, and created an extensive network of granaries to prevent the famines he had experienced in youth. No previous emperor, writes historian Timothy Brooke, invested so much personal attention in agricultural productivity or showed such concern for preventing peasant starvation. Yet alongside these progressive measures came a deeply conservative social vision. Having experienced the chaos of rebellion, Hongwu became obsessed with social stability through rigid hierarchy. He issued extensive regulations governing everything from clothing styles appropriate to different social classes to permissible funeral expenses. Most importantly, he reinstated and expanded the Neo-Confucian examination system, creating a meritocratic but ideologically orthodox bureaucracy. Perhaps the most psychologically revealing aspect of Hongwu's rule was his increasingly extreme suspicion of the very bureaucracy he created. As historian John Dardis notes, the irony of Hongwu's reign is that he built the most sophisticated bureaucratic system in Chinese history, then systematically undermined it through purges and personal intervention. By 1380, his paranoia had reached new heights with the abolition of the position of prime minister, centralizing all government decisions in his own hands. Officials lived in terror of his unpredictable rages and increasingly bizarre demands. Less known to casual readers of Chinese history is the intensely personal nature of Hongwu's rule. Unlike most emperors who governed through established protocols and bureaucratic structures, Hongwu insisted on micromanaging countless details of government. Contemporary records describe him personally editing agricultural manuals, designing irrigation systems, and even specifying the exact punishments for different crimes. This hands-on approach reflected both his distrust of officials and his extraordinary confidence in his own abilities, a confidence born from his remarkable rise from beggar to emperor. This personal involvement extended to the creation of the legal code that would govern China for centuries. Historian Edward Farmer notes that Hongwu frequently supervised torture sessions of accused criminals personally, believing that his peasant background gave him special insight into determining guilt or innocence. This disturbing practice reflected his deeper belief that conventional legal procedures might be manipulated by the educated elite, while his own intuition represented a more authentic form of justice. The Hongwu emperor's relationship with his own past evolved throughout his reign. In early years, he spoke openly about his humble origins, even using them to justify his policies favoring peasants. As his rule progressed, however, mentions of his background became increasingly dangerous. Historian Ray Huang suggests this shift reflected not merely political calculation, but a psychological need to distance himself from memories of powerlessness and humiliation. By the later years of his reign, the official narrative presented him as having been predestined for imperial rule, his early hardships recast as tests of character rather than reflections of his true origins. This reinvention extended to religion as well. Though he began as a Buddhist monk and rose to power through a Buddhist millenarian movement, Hongwu gradually distanced himself from Buddhism in favor of state-sponsored Confucianism. Yet privately, he maintained an intense interest in folk religion, divination, and supernatural practices. According to historian Edward Dreyer, Hongwu regularly consulted spirit mediums and diviners, particularly during his increasingly frequent episodes of paranoia about palace conspiracies. The most disturbing manifestation of Hongwu's paranoia came in his treatment of officials. By the 1380s, imperial censors, originally created to report corruption, functioned primarily as spies, reporting directly to the emperor about suspected disloyalty among other officials. Minor criticism of imperial policies could result in not just the execution of the official, but the extermination of his entire family line, a practice known as 9 familial exterminations. Historian Frederick Mote estimates that during the later decades of his reign, Hongwu executed more high officials than any other emperor in Chinese history, with total victims numbering in the tens of thousands. Yet alongside this reign of terror came genuine achievements. Under Hongwu's leadership, China expelled Mongol rule, rebuilt its agricultural system, restored its cultural confidence, and established governmental institutions that would function effectively for centuries. He rebuilt the Grand Canal, restored the civil service examination system, compiled comprehensive legal codes, and established the administrative structure that would govern China until the 20th century. In international relations, he re-established China as East Asia's dominant power, receiving tribute missions from Korea, Japan, and Southeast Asian kingdoms. The latter years of Hongwu's reign grew increasingly dark as his paranoia intensified. Court officials developed elaborate strategies to avoid triggering his unpredictable rages, including deliberately making minor mistakes so the emperor could correct them and feel superior. According to historian Ray Huang, the atmosphere at court became so oppressive that officials would pray for illness as an excuse to avoid imperial audiences where they might inadvertently provoke execution. When Hongwu died in 1398 at age 69, the empire breathed a collective sigh of relief, only to face a new crisis as his grandiose mausoleum complex, which he had forced thousands of workers to build at breakneck speed, became the site of a succession struggle between his son and his ambitious nephew. The Jianwen emperor who succeeded him would attempt to reverse many of his grandfather's more extreme policies, only to be overthrown by Hongwu's son, Zhu Di, in a bloody civil war. What explains the extraordinary psychological complexity of this peasant emperor? Historian Carney Fisher suggests that Hongwu represents a case study in how absolute power exacerbates rather than resolves underlying psychological trauma. His early experiences of powerlessness and starvation never left him, even after he commanded the largest army in the world and lived in unimaginable luxury. Each new conspiracy, real or imagined, triggered the survival instincts formed during his desperate youth. Perhaps the most revealing insight into Hongwu's character comes from his own poetry, which he wrote prolifically throughout his life. In one poem written late in his reign, he reflected, "From village youth to son of heaven, I have seen everything under the sun. Yet in my dreams I still wander the old paths, a beggar boy with an empty bowl." These lines capture the essential duality of Emperor Hongwu, the beggar who became emperor but remained, in his deepest psychology, the abandoned, vulnerable child fighting desperately for survival in a hostile world. This unresolved trauma fueled both his most admirable qualities: his empathy for the suffering poor, his determination to prevent famine, his tireless work ethic, and his most terrifying ones, his paranoia, his cruelty, and his inability to trust. Today, Chinese historians struggle to reconcile Hongwu's undeniable achievements with his equally undeniable atrocities. Official narratives emphasize his humble origins, nationalist credentials as a liberator from foreign rule, and institutional legacy. Yet the man himself remains too complex, too contradictory for simple categorization. The revolutionary who became more tyrannical than any despot he overthrew, the champion of the poor who established a rigid class hierarchy, the abandoned child who became the father of a nation, but could never overcome his own demons. As contemporary China reclaims its imperial past for nationalist purposes, the legacy of the beggar emperor serves as a warning that echoes across 6 centuries. Power may conceal the wounds of the powerless, but it cannot heal them, and those unhealed wounds, when armed with the apparatus of an empire, can leave scars across generations that no imperial edict can erase.